Hello, welcome to Empowering Student Learning Using Learning Intentions and Success Criteria, Part 2. The Part 1 of this video was offered in the spring, and that's something you would probably be able to find on Frontline if you're interested in it, and if you can't find it there, I have contact information in this presentation, and I'd be happy to give you a link to that. However, if you haven't watched that, this is not a prerequisite to watching the video today. This presentation can stand on its own. If you'd like to go back and look at that one, you're welcome to, but it isn't necessary to understanding today's presentation. My name is Heather Gary. I'm an ELA classroom teacher and a reading specialist, and I work at Landon Middle School. And I'm here because I've seen the impact that visible learning can have, and it is amazing. There's a word for people like me. They call us early adopters. And that simply means that when I hear about something new that piques my curiosity or I find interesting, I want to dive in for myself and see how it works. And that means I make all the stumbles and falls and trial and error through that process. And that's okay. That's the way I learn. That's my learning style. But since I did that, I jumped into this visible learning at first. I saw the impact that it could have with my students. I saw my students go from passive participants in their learning to actively engaged and confident learners who knew where they were going and knew they were going to be successful because all that had been laid out for them ahead of time. So I am excited to share this process with you and to help you understand it on a deeper level. My contact information will be available in this presentation, and I want you to feel free to contact me with questions, or if you would like some more resources, I'll do my best to point you in the right direction for the next steps and whatever will help you partner with you on your journey to visible learning. There is a video that is linked to this presentation. It's 15 minutes long. I have a suggested place in the presentation for you to stop and watch that video. That's just a suggestion. You can do it at your leisure. But my colleague, Dee Nicholas, who is a member of the CNA team for the district, just like I am, we partnered together to model the process for you that is in this presentation. So I do suggest watching that when you can. Hopefully it'll help you a lot to understand and see the process in action. On this slide, I have handouts, and I'm going to click on the link to show you. If for any reason you're not able to click on these links, I will link them in the description box on the YouTube video. And also, don't hesitate to email me because I'd be happy to send them to you that way as well. So this is a document I designed to help. It is a little small here in its present form, but this is just going to help you if you're working together with a PLC. I started with what was outlined in the Teacher Clarity Playbook, and then I just added to it. I just fleshed out the process a little bit more because for me, working through that Teacher Clarity book was a little too vague. It was a little too general for me to find it very useful. So I tried to make this one a little bit more detailed and added in some things that could help you along the way, like reminders of what a good learning intention should have, space for learning progressions, a space to identify whether your learning intention is a skill, a concept, or knowledge applied via a skill, tips for writing good success criteria, and then guiding questions for developing that success criteria. And this other handout is guiding questions for you to use in PLCs. They have categories. So there's a question set for learning progressions, a question set for learning intentions, and a question set for success criteria and assessing learning. These are questions just to use as you see fit in PLCs or with a grade level partner to help guide you through the process. All right. And at the end of this presentation, I have frequently asked questions and links to many extra resources. And as I said before, I'm going to link all of those in the description box on YouTube, but also please don't hesitate to reach out to me. My contact information will be in here. Okay, so here's our learning intentions for this presentation. We're learning to collaboratively use principles of visible learning, also called teacher clarity, to design learning intentions success criteria, and authentic assessments using learning progressions. And we're doing this so that we can empower students to understand the process of learning and take ownership of their learning journey. What success will look like is that we can analyze content standards to determine learning progressions, design learning opportunities that will move students' understanding toward mastery, and develop authentic assessments to determine how our students are doing with their learning journey. John Hattie is the author of Visible Learning. He's a professor from New Zealand, and he created and conducted a meta analysis of over 800 skills in teaching and learning. And he determined for each one of those an effect size. Hattie identified an effect size of zero point 0.4 would equal a year's worth of learning for students. So that anything above that zero point 0.4 effect size is giving us more than a year's worth of growth, which is very exciting. Teacher clarity has an effect size of 0.75. That's almost 2 years worth of growth. That's almost like doubling the learning for your students in a year's time. When teachers follow the process of visible learning, they've thought through what are the most important aspects of the learning. They're choosing learning activities with intentionality, and doing this work brings another level of clarity to their work. When students know what they're learning and why they're learning it and how they're going to learn it, they're much more likely to succeed at learning. And if you've ever reflected in a PD session, an all day PD session, you know learning is hard. It is not an easy thing. So, the more clarity we can give students, the more that we can support them through the process, the better. When teachers communicate learning intentions and success criteria so that students can identify where they're going, how they're progressing, and where they'll go next, then students are provided with enough clarity to own their learning. And that, for me, is very exciting. I want to give you an analogy. If I were to ask you to go with me on a road trip, you'd probably have some questions. You'd probably want to know where we were going. You'd expect me to have a pretty compelling reason why you should pack up and go with me. You'd want some sort of GPS system or a roadmap so that we were sure to get where we were intending to go. And you'd want to know what we'd need to take with us in order to have a successful experience. Packing for a trip to the north is going to look a little different than packing for a trip in the south. If you think of a road trip as an analogy, the road trip is like the learning intention. It's the destination, it's where we're going. The why is the relevance, that part where I have to tell you why you should be going on this journey with me. GPS is like the learning progressions. And we'll talk more about those in detail as this presentation goes on. And the packing list is like our success criteria. And the checkpoints along the way where we stop for gas and check up on the journey, make sure everything's in working order with the car, and that we're on track to arrive when we intend to arrive. That's like formative assessments. Now, to further the analogy, this is a tale of two road trips. If I provided all of those things we talked about in the last slide, then I've successfully taken you on a road trip to the destination of my choice. However, if I invite you to help plan stops, such as where we'll eat along the way, some scenic bypasses we might want to stop and see, some gift shops that maybe are amazing and we'd like to have knowledge of and have some souvenirs of our trip. And if I ask you to keep watch over the gauges to make sure everything's in working order, now you're not just my passenger, you're my partner. You're invested in this trip now in a way that you weren't when you were just my passenger. This is the power of inviting our students to co-construct success criteria with us and to monitor their progress toward the learning intentions. We're going to touch on co-construction in this video. If you're not there yet, be patient with yourself. This is a journey. Visible learning is a journey. For some of us, it is an opposite way of teaching than the way we were trained. And that's certainly true for me. I was taught to come up with a project or a learning opportunity and then attach it to a standard and then go from there. Visible learning turns that all upside down, where we're starting first with the standard, and then we're breaking that standard down into the requisite skills that we need that students will need to master in order to master the standard. And then from there, using that as success criteria so that students can see exactly what they need to do to demonstrate their learning. And after all of that, then we start with the learning opportunities and the opportunities to respond. That's when we design them with intentionality. And from there, we design our authentic assessments. This is a quote from John Hattie that particularly resonates with me. I have a link here to Padlet. Padlet is a lot like a Jamboard. So if you can click on the link and add to the space there your interpretation of this quote, what it means to you. If you can't click on this link right now, it will be in the description box of the YouTube video. So go ahead and try it from there. After you're done with the presentation is fine, or at your leisure. But it would be great if you would take the time to do this. This will help us all see what other people are thinking in terms of visible learning, how they're where they are at in their journey, and it helps us build a shared understanding of the concepts. All right, continuing with the road trip analogy, we have a little roadmap for learning here. Learning intentions, this is what they do in the process. They tell students what they're learning, where they're going. They can be framed as we are learning to, and there's an acronym for that called a WALT. You don't have to use the words we are learning to. You could frame it in a different way. But what's important here is that it comes from the standard and it's not written exactly as the standard is written. It's written in kid-friendly language and it's a summary of what students are going to be learning. Then the teacher provides relevance by telling students why they're going there. How will this benefit them in the future? And I think this is a critical component for today's students. When I was growing up and in my K-12 experience, I didn't question why we were learning what we were learning. I just knew I was a student. That was my job to learn, and I did what the teachers asked. But we're living in a completely different world now where so much knowledge is available to students at the touch of the fingertips. Google is an amazing source for anything you might want to know about. And there's many other social media platforms and other ways to obtain knowledge. So it is a different time, and it is critically important that we attach learning to students so that they can see how this will be beneficial to them in their lives now and in the future. Number 3, success criteria. That helps students see the skills they need to master or the knowledge they need to reach the destination. You can frame those as I will know I'm successful when I can. You don't have to use those words exactly, but what's important with success criteria is that it's written as I can statements and it's written as kid-friendly language and their steps for students to master the learning. Number 4, LISC is an abbreviation for learning intentions and success criteria. They're most successful when created together in a PLC or with a grade level partner. And the reason for that is when you're doing it with a PLC or a grade level partner, you're building collective efficacy. And that is helping us to give a guaranteed and viable curriculum to every student. That being said, some people don't have a PLC or a grade level partner, and I recognize that. I want you to know that it's okay. You can do this process by yourself. I would encourage you, if you're in that situation, to reach out to a colleague in another school or in another district, somebody that has a similar content to yours at some time, so that you can bounce ideas off each other and see if you're interpreting these things in the same way and if you're on the right track. Getting feedback from colleagues is vitally important to our process of growth as teachers. But if you need to work through the process by yourself, using those handouts and guiding questions can be worked through on your own. Number 5 here is teachers begin with a unit of study or a content standard. Then they identify the learning progressions. And learning progressions are the steps that students have to go through. They're not explicitly stated within a standard. What it takes is a teacher sitting down and saying, okay, in order to get my students to this outcome, which is what a standard is, it's a desired outcome. It's meant for students to be able to master that standard by the end of a school year. In order for them to get there, what skills am I going to have to teach them, breaking down the things that they're going to have to know in order to be able to master that standard? So think of it like scaffolding, or like climbing a ladder to the skills and concepts that we need for them to learn. If this process of thinking that through overwhelms you, learning progressions, I will let you know that I have links in the extra resources section of this presentation to several states that have taken each standard and broken them down into learning progressions. It's really good to look at those and use that as a starting point for your thinking. You may agree with them, you may expand them further than those states did, or you may uh, just use it as a guide for you to start your thinking and then take off on your own. Any way you do that is fine. I have learning progressions linked for social studies, science, math, and ELA. I don't have any for the other content areas, but if you would like to look through the ones that are linked, I'm sure you could find some elective and different content areas than just the ones that I've linked within those links. So do check them out, even if you're not science, social studies, math, or ELA. And number 6, after identifying learning progressions, teachers can then create learning intentions and success criteria and design authentic learning activities and assessments. So, just as a review, if you were on board with the first session, and anyway, if you're not, this is some more detail about what learning progressions are. The graphic you see here comes from the Teacher Clarity Playbook, and they identify learning progressions as tent poles. So if that analogy works for you, that's why I put it here. Everybody has a different learning style, and everybody learns in a little bit different way. So if the analogy of the road trip resonated with you, go ahead and use that. If this one resonates with you, use this. It's whatever's going to help you grasp these concepts. So standards are expected outcomes, as I said before. They don't explain how students get to mastery. They just explain what students are expected to know or be able to do. There's skills that students need to master and or concepts they'll need to understand. Learning progressions are our professional estimation of how learning will progress from one concept to another. When working on learning progressions with a PLC or a grade level partner, here's some things to consider. What prior knowledge do students have or need to have in order to achieve mastery of the standard? We have yellow booklets in our district that are our grade level standards, and they contain the curriculum design maps. At middle school level, they're yellow booklets. I know for elementary, they're a green booklet. I'm not sure what they are for high school. But in those booklets, we have a vertical progression. And that means that it's going to show you the shifts in the standard and the grade below and the grade above the one that you're teaching. If you don't have one of those booklets, you can find this information on different websites. One of them is called ccss.org. That stands for Common Core State Standards.org. You could also find it on KSDE website. They have a breakdown of all the grade levels for most of the content areas there as well. KSDE.org, by the way. Okay, so another thing to consider is how can we sequence the concepts and skills within the standard in a logical way? Learning intentions tell the student what the learning destination is. Learning intentions can be 3 different major categories. They can be knowledge that the students need to have, skills they need to acquire, or concepts they need to understand. Another thing to take into consideration when writing learning intentions is what level of learning you're at. There's Nancy Frey, who is one of the authors of the Teacher Clarity Playbook, identifies surface, deep, and transfer learning as 3 different levels. Surface level would be, for an example, knowing the definitions of figurative language. Surface knowledge is important. We can't skip over it. Students in every content area have to have that kind of knowledge. And a lot of times it becomes a shared language between us so that we can get to those deeper levels of understanding and deeper levels of meaning. They're all important, but we need to be focused on not just staying at that level of surface. We want our students to be able to go into deeper levels of learning and also to transfer, where they take the skills and concepts that they've learned and they're able to transfer them into an applied skill or product. All right, so here's some checkpoints, questions to consider as you're writing learning intentions. Are the learning intentions presented as a learning destination? Are the learning intentions a summary or general statement of the learning? And are they written in kid-friendly language while still retaining the rigor of the standard? Success criteria provides students with clear and attainable goals. Success criteria outlines the evidence that students must produce to show that they've accomplished the learning intention. And here's some questions to ask yourself with your PLC or grade level partner as you're designing these. Have we specified what students are to do to demonstrate their learning? Did our success criteria provide a map for students to understand the process of learning? Did our success criteria use specific terms from the standard? Does our SCE contain only objective language? This is where you want to make sure that it's steps that they can achieve, and we don't want to use words that are subjective or evaluative, like best or any of those things that contain subjectivity. We want them to be achievable, objective steps that students can follow to to demonstrate their learning. Okay, learning opportunities. They give students many pathways for progressing toward the outlined learning goals. They could be strategies, activities, tasks, anything that makes their thinking visible to you. It's very important to give students time to think and reflect and discuss their learning with others. We need to know how they think in order to know what they know. So, using Kagan structures in this process is a great thing because they give students an opportunity in a structured way to collaborate, giving everyone a role in that collaboration. And it allows you, as the teacher, to move about the room and listen in on their thinking. And at that point, if you hear any misconceptions or wrong thinking, you can correct that and guide them through that process. But what we need to think about during the planning process as teachers is to choose the best learning opportunities for students to show their thinking and learning on any given learning intention or success criteria. And here are some questions to help guide that process. How will the knowledge of how learners are progressing influence our teaching? I like that question because as you're working through this process and students are at the level of learning opportunities and you're making formative decisions, if you notice, for example, that 95% of your class has got it, they've mastered the learning intention, what will you do with that information now? You've planned this lesson, say, for 3 days, and on day one, they've got it. How will that influence your teaching? And the reciprocal is true as well. You've planned for 3 days. On day three, most of the class is not getting it. What are you going to do? How is that going to influence your teaching? All right, the QR code that I have on this slide is a link to the video that Dee, Nicholas, and I created. It's 15 minutes long, and it shows us going through the process. We are ELA teachers, and we both are on the CNA team at the 6th grade level. So we chose a reading informational standard at the 6th grade level for this demonstration video. If that's not your content area, I want to encourage you that you can still get valuable information from watching this video because we're modeling how to go through the process of first choosing a standard and then breaking it down into skills such as the nouns and the verbs, what that standard is asking of students. Then we identify the learning progressions, what students are going to need to be able to do in order to master that standard. And from there, we take that learning progression information and we use it to create success criteria. And then from there, we create success criteria and think about opportunities to respond and learning opportunities. So I'd encourage you to watch that video, see the process demonstrated. Even if you don't teach AELA, I do feel that you'll find some value in it just by seeing the process. I also have on this slide another Padlet. This is a a reflective question about learning opportunities. So if you can click on this link and go in and add to that Padlet, that would be great. And if you can't click this link, I will have it in the description box on the YouTube video. Okay, using success criteria to design assessments. Here's another analogy. If the check engine, if, I'm sorry, I stumbled. If the check engine light goes on in my car, I know better than to ignore it. It's a signal to me to do something. Think of assessments like the gauges in a car. They need to inform your next steps with learners. There's something to pay attention to and not ignore. Because if they are ignored, the problems will accumulate over time. We should be thinking carefully as teachers about how and when to assess. And when we do that, it's like setting the gauges to the factory settings or setting the vehicle to how it works best. Formative assessments are one way to design assessments to check in with students and see how they're doing with the learning. And those can be very quick. Things like exit slips or a sketch or conversations with table partners. But what's important to do in the PLC process is to place those formative assessments strategically to determine how students are progressing with their learning and how they're progressing through the success criteria. So this is something to discuss in PLC or with grade level partner. Like, okay, now at this point in their learning, we expect our students to be here. So let's choose a formative assessment to see how they're doing. That type of thing. And then when thinking about longer assessments, think about how to allow students to show their thinking to you. That's a limitation on multiple choice assessments. When we see what the student got on a multiple choice test, we can't see why they chose B and not D. I am not saying that you should never do multiple choice assessments. Please do not hear me saying that. Multiple choice assessments definitely have a place. But if you don't know how and why a student arrived at an answer, it's more difficult to determine their progress. So, one way to handle this is to give them a multiple choice test and then have them in small group explain their thinking to you. Why did you choose B? Why didn't you choose C? What were you thinking? And or another way to do this is to add a box to a multiple choice assessment to have them explain their thinking. If you do this in class more often than not, you're training them to really think about their thinking and why they did choose them. You're training them to be thinkers, which I think is fabulous. Thinking is my favorite. But this is something to consider and allow for it when you can. Allow them a space and time to share with you their thinking and how they arrived at an answer. Okay. Using success criteria as a basis for assessments helps keep the learning journey clear while learners progress through it. Okay. Now, the power of co-constructing. Remember the road trip analogy? This is the part where I haven't just invited you on a road trip that I chose and planned out. This is the one where I've invited you in the process. I've made you my partner. I've asked you to help in the process of planning where we're going to stop, what we're going to see along the way, and what we're going to do. And I've asked you to take an active role in checking the gauges and making sure everything's in working order. Co-constructing means building a shared understanding of learning expectations and a path to progress. Here's some great things about it. It provides a coat hanger on which surface knowledge can be organized. It increases student confidence and decreases anxiety and connects new learning to prior knowledge. I think that decreasing anxiety is hugely important right now after what we've gone through in the past couple of years with the pandemic. And we know that coming back to school has been very anxiety producing for a lot of students. One thing that we can do as teachers to alleviate some of that is to make the process of teaching and learning very clear. And one way to do that is with co-constructing. We're going to talk about what that means on the next slide. But another powerful component of co-constructing is that it increases the likelihood that learners will reinvest in future learning opportunities, and it increases students' self-efficacy as learners. And self-efficacy is the belief that we have the skills to face challenges and reach our goals. So the way that we can co-construct success criteria with students is through modeling. And when we do that, we need to make our thinking explicit. That can be through worked examples, which would be something that a very common component of instruction, I would imagine, for math teachers, and maybe science teachers as well. It can come through reading and sharing that thinking that you do as a reader, as you're making inferences, making connections to what you read, all those things that you do to try to decode the text and make sense of it. It can also come from exemplars. A really good idea, I think, for having students co construct with you. Let's just use an example of an essay. I think most contents write some form of essay. So if I wanted my students to write, for example, an argumentative essay, I would start with giving them exemplars of excellent student work from maybe the year before or maybe a few years before. I would ask them, what makes this essay good? What makes it not so good? And really get them to dive into the analysis of that essay and identify components that they think were very strong and things that held that essay back from being just as the most excellent. I would also show them bad examples. What what's good about this essay might be harder to find on a bad example. What would make this essay better? Allowing students to have the time to really think through and see examples of what you're asking them to do helps them really come to a clear understanding of what they're going to be asked to do. And it's helping them also to participate in the process. You could also use examples from professional authors. The point is giving them the time to discover for themselves with a group or partner or by themselves what what you're going to want them to eventually produce for themselves. They're diving into it. They're discovering the process, and they're discovering the elements that are needed to make something a success. This can take some time, but I want to encourage you that this investment of time, please do think of it as an investment, is going to have pay great dividends down the road because you have invited them to think, analyze, and really deconstruct something that you're going to ask them to do before they have to do it. And then once they've done that, then you can help them, guide them through the process of setting up success criteria. When they have helped you through the process of identifying success criteria, they're going to have more ownership in it. They're going to have more investment in it. Here are some steps for the co-construction of success criteria. It's not going to work with every learning opportunity. It's not going to work for every situation. So determine when it would be very impactful, the most impactful, and then use it at that time. Then you need to gather the tools that students will use. This would be exemplars, maybe projects that have been done before, or things of that nature, whatever it is that you're working on. You need to gather the non examples, things that are not successful examples of what you're asking them to do, and determine the method that will be used to share the criteria with students. This can be many different ways, so that's something to think through. And then generate the initial success criteria with students. This is something you can tweak later on, but you're going to invite them into the process. So you need to categorize the criteria, then use a T-chart, a rubric, a checklist. Those are just some ideas. And then you're going to have students assess themselves, where they are in the learning journey, and then set personal goals. This is just a note about surface, deep, and transfer learning. Surface, deep, and transfer all describe different phases of learning, and all three of these phases are important. And strategies for learning should be chosen according to what phase of learning the students are in. Um, Following this visible learning model helps teachers become more intentional about the opportunities they give for students to respond and demonstrate their learning. This link is to a video of Nancy Fry talking about the different phases of learning. It's excellent, and it's a short video. It's in the neighborhood of 3 minutes long. This is a note about assessment capable learners. According to Hattie, when teachers are clear about what students are learning and why, they can better select learning opportunities. And when teachers know what those learning opportunities are, they can show learners through exemplars and modeling. And they can also design learning that allows students to show their thinking and give and receive feedback. Assessment capable learners has an effect size of 1.33. That's a little mind blowing to me. That would be equal to 4 times a year's worth of growth. And these are the characteristics of an assessment capable learner. And it's something we can all do. And this process of visible learning will help us get there. I love that quote. And making learning visible makes a more pleasant and effective journey for both learners and teachers. I hope that you will use visible learning and the principles that I've laid out here. And I hope that you enjoy the journey. And I trust me, when you start to see the impact it has on your students, it is so rewarding. It is so exciting. And I wish you all the best on your journey. If you have any questions, you can find me on Twitter. That's my username. Here's my email address. This section includes frequently asked questions, and I will leave that to you to read at your leisure. These are the credits, the sources that I used to create this presentation. And here's the extra resources. These are the links. If for some reason, most of these come from the Teacher Clarity Playbook. So if for some reason you can't get to the link, I would suggest making a Corwin account at www.corwin.com. It's free to do that, and that might be the barrier, if you have one, to not being able to click on some of these uh, links. So try that. And if you still have problems, please don't hesitate to contact me. And here are some more links. And I will put those in the description as well. And I have this says this is where the other planning sheet will go, but I just need to change that. I already did link that in the beginning of this presentation. All right, this was done. The template is by Slides Carnival, if you're interested in that kind of thing. And I thank you for your time. And I am interested to see how you do with this journey and how this has impacted you. I encourage you to use the Padlet links to chime in and add to the conversation there. And I encourage you to reach out too. I'd love to know how it's going for you. Thank you so much.